Tonight on Dateline. On Christmas Eve, she vanished without a trace. A radiant young mother-to-be.
I knew she was missing.
Now the bodies of a woman and a baby boy have washed up on the California shore. Have police found the remains of Laci Peterson?
If this turns out to be Laci, we want the animal responsible for this heinous act to pay.
Dennis Murphy with the latest on looking for Laci. Tonight on Dateline. As Laci Peterson's mother breaks down.
No parent should ever have to think about the way their child was murdered.
Prosecutors break out their case against Scott Peterson.
I can't honestly say that there were any solid leads that would have led somewhere else.
And his parents stand by their son.
This is just a travesty.
Tonight, the latest on Laci, the stories you haven't heard, including new details about witnesses who saw Scott Peterson at the marina the day Laci disappeared.
They didn't see anything in the boat, but they noticed that he was having a very bad time putting the boat in the water.
Keith Morrison on the investigation into the death of Laci Peterson.
He came to court in his red California prison jumpsuit, the goatee he had grown now conspicuously gone, and announced to the world, "I am not guilty." But the question now, and not just in Modesto, California, is this: can Scott Peterson get a fair trial anywhere?
I have not seen the amount of public emotion and press interest combined together in one story ever around here.
Sheriff's Department spokesman Kelly Houston says not even in the famous Chandra Levy case, also connected to Modesto, was there anything like this scene at the police station on Friday night. Never, he said, has the booking of a suspect forced officials to dispatch officers to ensure that a swelling crowd of angry people did not harm the man being charged.
Then at about midnight, at the peak of it, just before Scott arrived, there was about 300 citizens out there. They were shouting, they were holding signs, "Murderer." It was a mob scene. We were holding people back and creating a little canal or channel for the detectives from the Modesto Police Department to be able to drive down into our pit and booking area and get him in there as quick as we could.
And after his court appearance, here was Scott Peterson's family, angry, defending their son, accusing law enforcement of perpetrating an injustice.
A lot of people are not fooled by what went on here. This is just a travesty.
And then Laci's family at a packed, deeply emotional press conference demanding justice, though without ever naming Scott.
Soon after Laci went missing, I made a promise to her that if she has been harmed, we will seek justice for her and Connor and make sure that that person responsible for their deaths will be punished. I can only hope that the sound of Laci's voice begging for her life and begging for the life of her unborn child is heard over and over and over again in the mind of that person every day for the rest of his life. The person responsible should be held accountable and punished for the tragedy and devastation forced upon so many of us.
But was that person Scott Peterson? The evidence seems overwhelmingly clear to the district attorney who'll be overseeing the case, James Brazelton.
I can't honestly say that there were any solid or reliable leads that would have led somewhere else.
The evidence so far? The bodies of the victims, Laci and her unborn son Connor, were found so far from home, 80 miles, but just 2 miles from the place Scott had claimed to be fishing.
He puts himself at that location within a short distance of where the bodies were found at the time that they disappeared. That seems to be a fairly significant piece of evidence.
Also reported today that police found concrete in Peterson's boat and drums of it in his house. And police reportedly found receipts for weights purchased by Scott Peterson. The weights were never found. There is evidence, they say, that his fishing gear wasn't used. All the evidence gathered meticulously by investigators, according to the prosecutor.
I personally encourage them to work slowly and thoroughly and methodically and come up with accurate results. And I think they've done that in this case.
And last night, Newsweek correspondent Andrew Murr told Dateline of even more new information that could be evidence against Scott Peterson. A gardener at the Berkeley Marina reportedly told police he saw Scott with his boat the day Laci disappeared.
He saw Scott pull in around lunchtime with the pickup and the boat in the back, and thought, you know, that's an awfully small boat for such a choppy day out here. He was having a very bad time putting the boat in the water, getting the trailer down, getting the boat off the trailer, and putting in.
Peterson's actions at the marina will surely be part of any case against him.
Investigators and forensic scientists are, you can be sure, looking at the remains of the corpse and trying to figure out whether this body was anchored to the bottom. Certainly it's been the case in the past where murderers feel pretty confident that they have disposed of a body that will never come up because they've attached weights or in some other way kept the body to the bottom. Whether that happened in this case, I don't know, but we certainly know that the investigators are looking at that possibility.
And more. Reports say police discovered Peterson washed his clothes when he got home before he reported his wife missing. That his house smelled of bleach when investigators first arrived. That when police arrested Peterson, he was carrying $10,000, his brother's ID, and a passport application. If he was innocent, prosecutors asked, why was he evidently preparing to flee? Suspicion had already been raised by Scott's behavior when he acknowledged he was having an affair.
Yes, I had a romantic relationship that was inappropriate and unfair to a lot of people. And I apologize to everyone involved in that, to all of the families.
And there have been reports he told friends he was unhappy about the impending birth of a child. NBC's chief legal correspondent, Dan Abrams, has been in Modesto tracking the case. Will there be a motive advanced in the prosecution of this case?
You know, they don't have to prove motive, but I would expect that they would offer something up. Either that he didn't want to have a baby, or that he didn't want to have Laci around, or maybe both. They may not know for certain exactly why he did it, but I would expect that they'll paint a picture of what was going on in Scott Peterson's life.
4 months ago, his life seemed a very different story. After the Christmas Eve disappearance, after Scott returned from what he said was his fishing trip at San Francisco Bay, when these two families were so close they finished each other's sentences, when it was a massive volunteer search, posters, ribbons, reward offers, and emotions running high.
If you'd like to take these telegrams.
Doubt about Scott's story began to grow early on. People were surprised, confused perhaps, to hear that in January Scott traded in Laci's car at this Modesto dealership. The agent said it made him uncomfortable. The dealer turned the car over to Laci's father. There was something else, too, at the time, just a curious thing. One of the key volunteer organizers, Terry Western, the family friend since Laci was very small, is also a real estate agent. And one morning, Scott told her he had a question.
I said, how are you doing this morning? And he goes, I've had a tough time. And I said, I'm sorry, Scott. And he said, I need to talk to you about selling the home. And I said, this is not the time nor place, Scott. You know, we can talk about that later.
Even so, friends defended him. They had seen, they said, this man's love for his beautiful and very pregnant wife. They trusted him.
A lot. Yeah. They are cute. They're just adorable couple. Yeah.
They adore each other.
Which is why what happened at the end of January was such a shock to everybody.
Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
A young woman named Amber Frey summoned the courage to admit right there in front of the whole country she'd been having an affair with Scott Peterson.
We did have a romantic relationship.
And not only that.
Scott told me he was not married.
And that's when all those nagging doubts came flooding out. When family solidarity collapsed, when the families no longer even appeared together.
How come nobody saw you at the Berkeley Marina and nobody saw Laci walking the dog, huh?
When some media began openly to accuse Scott Peterson of murder.
Why didn't you tell the truth?
And then last week, the bodies of Laci Peterson and her unborn 8-month-old son were found, and now it's an official accusation. Now the DA has charged him with capital murder, 2 counts. And may seek the death penalty, though Laci's family will also have something to say about that.
I had also advised them that at some point in that process we would be discussing the very issue of capital punishment with them to see what their input may be.
Do you think your appearing on television tomorrow will help?
But how strong is the case against Scott Peterson?